But now I'm going to hand back to Joy and ask Albert and Nikolay to turn on their videos and their mics and join Joy for this first session.
Thank you, Matthew. So I'm very hi, Albert, Nikolay. I'm very thrilled to host this panel and featuring two visionary founders, Albert and Nikolay, at the forefront of AI and crypto innovation. Their project Compute Labs has been one of our portfolio companies that we're extremely proud of, and I'm very excited to have them to share their insights in two of the hottest topics today. So the advent of public blockchain is one of the most profound developments in computer science history, and the development of AI will and probably already is having a profound impact on everybody's life. So blockchain technology provides a new template for transaction settlement, for data storage and system design, while AI is a revolution in computation, in analysis and content delivery. So innovation in the two industries is unlocking new use cases. For example, crypto provides AI with a permissionless, trustless, and composable settlement layer. And this unlocks use cases such as making the hardware more accessible through decentralized compute systems. So Albert and Nikolay's company, Compute Labs, transform this physical GPUs into digital assets using blockchain-based compute tokenization protocol. And this enables fractional ownership of high-performing GPUs, allowing investors to trade and stake GPU-backed assets, increasing the liquidity, accessibility, and investment opportunities in AI and also computing sector in general. So I wouldn't say too much for Albert and Nikolay, and I'm excited to know the recent development of the company as well. So happy to have you here, Albert and Nikolay. The first question, could you share with us what is the big problem you're trying to seek to solve here?
Yeah, absolutely. It's a very good question. And first off, thank you for having us here. We're very honored and happy to be here. Uh,
Thank
it's really exciting. So to answer your question directly, the problem that we're trying to solve is to turn a formerly illiquid asset that is just sitting in a data center, not really much ability to trade on it or have any transactions or to, give off your position to someone else. We're turning that into a liquid asset using blockchain. So traditionally speaking, when we're looking at data center infrastructure or GPUs and compute assets, they are sitting in cold data centers. They make a lot of noise. But oftentimes, the owners of these compute assets are trying to trade their position because they either want to upsize to a newer product or because simply they're trying to hedge it. But they can't do that when it's just sitting there and when it's already performing some computational tasks or making revenue. So blockchain is simply allowing us to turn this into a liquid asset and then giving ownership to whoever wants it within the chain.
Thank you, Nikolai. Thank you for explaining what Computer Labs do. Um, how about Albert? Do we have anything in addition to share with us?
Yeah, like Nick mentioned, thanks a lot for the invite, and I apologize for not being able to turn my camera on because I'm currently like traveling in APAC and like seems like the VPN is having issues. But to answer your first question, I would say like the biggest problem we're seeing is, we're talking to many data centers in the world who are having issues to raise capital to expand on their GPU cover for on their GPU offering. And oftentimes they're seeing a really high capex on their company book. And that's also where we come in and help. So we help those data centers to move their high capex into a more sustainable and also manageable OpEx. I would say that's also one big problem we're helping here. Ultimately, we want to be able to like make the GPU acquisition or GPU hardware listing to be a more I guess widely used scenario or use case for those data centers to expand. And potentially we want to be the utility and also the financing layer for AI and compute infrastructure.
I see. Is this very novel idea or is anyone else in the market doing similar things as you?
Yeah, I mean, that's a really good question. So I think Compute Labs, we were founded in last March 2024, and we closed our pre-seed in April last year. Shortly after that, I think like we started seeing more projects like doing similar things where like have their business model designed based on similar ideology. So yeah, I think now there are more projects in the market seeing the big potential in this field and trying to like build some useful tools for expanding and also helping data centers with their infrastructure.
Yeah, so how do blockchain enable the transformative solution? So I guess my question is that does this problem can be solved in Web3 only? So for instance, if Amazon decides to spin off AWS and it becomes a tradable on the stock market, do you think it can realize the same outcome for retail investors or investor trying to get GPU as an asset class?
The short answer is generally no. The Web2 market doesn't have the correct infrastructure to allow the types of trading features that Web3 enables. So, for example, um, now there's different business models and how to approach tokenizing compute assets. The way we do it is by taking ownership of an asset on our balance sheet. But what we're actually doing is we are taking an SPV that owns compute infrastructure, and the SPV then, of course, has shares representing one GPU per token and all that. So in a Web2 market, it's quite difficult to sell off your position of an SPV or your LP position. You can do it, of course, don't get me wrong, but there's not enough liquidity and there's not enough volume. Web3 enables easier transactions, easier trade, and easier just collateralization. It's going to be much more difficult to take your SPV LP position to a bank and get a collateral than compared to a Web3 market.
Absolutely. So how much, may I know this roughly the size of this compute asset right now, the scale?
Yeah, so that's a great question. It really significantly varies. We have some small server clusters that are starting off on the 1.8 million range. That's like 50 servers of 5090s, the latest consumer grade of NVIDIA. And now we're speaking to some of our operators and helping them fundraise for a $200 million cluster of a B200, another newly designed and released chip. And that is a 512 node server cluster. So there's a gigantic range between the size of the cluster and what our data center needs. Um, but the point is that we help data centers simply get capital, and we're happy to help them all.
I see. So yes, I get a question here. In building hundreds of, in terms of the data centers before the use case and monetization is really here, it seems like a lot of capex around the world that also needs help to for the infrastructure in other areas as well. Is that something that we are looking to do as well?
Yeah, absolutely. We are solving the problem of getting accessible CapEx for data centers. And for investors, we're solving the problem of deploying their capital and getting a really attractive yield, a really high IRR.
Mm-hmm. I see. And Albert, you wanted to say something earlier?
Oh yes, I was actually trying to like type my answer into the Q&A panel as well. I saw this question about like how much of this kind of compute assets is illiquid right now. Unfortunately, like most of the compute assets that are currently running in data centers are illiquid, in a sense that there's no established trading platform for the hardware. There are multiple marketplaces for like trading the compute access, but when it comes to the actual hardware, there's not a really established marketplace. And so because of that, I just to answer that question, like the current asset scale is probably at like 300 to 400 billion USD dollars at the moment worldwide. As for like the second question, has the world really gotten ahead of itself again in AI? I would say that it was definitely the situation. Um, Probably 1 year ago, or I guess when OpenAI first released ChatGPT back in end of 2022 and also starting in 2023, there were a lot of FOMO, and also there were a lot of players who were operating in the traditional mining or some other industry, and they rushed into the AIDC or the computing industry, and we could see this happening because like the H100, the price actually went significantly up during that FOMO period, and we knew some partners who actually spent over almost like 350,000 on each H100 server back then, just because the demand is so high, but the supply is like still controlled by NVIDIA. And now, after almost 2 years, we see that FOMO trend are being died down, and that's why, at least on the current market for H100 price, it went significantly down from, I think the peak was $8 per hour on demand. Currently, is sitting at below $2 per hour. That's for the H100. So just based on the pricing trend itself, I would say that there were definitely a time already almost passed that the supply of H100 uh, was more than the actual demand. But now after DeepSeek, and our thesis is that the entire world or the entire AI industry just experienced a grow the pie event where you know uh, large language model companies, they're actually seeing that, well, I really, it seems like I really don't need that much capital
Mhm.
to develop a model that are as good as the ones being developed by OpenAI or Anthropic. But in the meantime, because of that, there are going to be more competition. So we usually use this example to explain why we feel like the actual AI demand is going to continue to rise. Is, let's say if the compute price or the cost becomes 1/10 of let's just say last year, but in the meantime, the overall AI demand, because of like all the PR, all the new product, and all like how human being or like how the entire society realize how significant and widespread the AI use case can be in their daily life, the overall demand for the AI actually 100 times. And if we combine those two numbers together, we're still seeing almost a 10-time overall compute demand boost. And that's how we envision that after DeepSeek and after, ChatGPT and all the other large language model companies to realize that, there's going to be more competition and also more use case because of the mass adoption. Um, we're still we still think we're early, and that's why helping with all the capex, we don't feel like that's additional or like that's going to be too much for the world to take. But in fact, we feel like we're still early. I hope
Thank
that
you.
answers the questions.
Yes, absolutely. An additional question on that is the supplier side very segmented? So, for example, you say all there are monopolies and big players in the ground. that control like basically all the sources of all the supply. But when we were negotiating on the value chain, what is our niche advantage in getting those suppliers, or like to consolidate all the decentralized compute against not to say against, but versus those big players, monopolies.
I'm having just a little bit of difficulty understanding the question precisely. Are you asking about the supply side from a manufacturing perspective or from a cloud perspective or something else?
Yeah, from the manufacturing perspective. So when we were gathering those resources, what is like our strategy in negotiating with them?
Gotcha.
Or
Gotcha. Okay, yeah, that's an excellent question. So, well, we do understand that NVIDIA is the hot player of the market, of course. And then, of course, they have competition with AMD, Intel, Tensor now is coming
yeah,
up, and then a few other startups coming out as well. Um, I would argue that NVIDIA is not a monopoly. And in fact, they do have well, one, we are on a NVIDIA Inception Alliance program, so we are still kind of privy to them. And but there are a lot of manufacturers. So what happens is NVIDIA designs the chip, and then we have the manufacturers, so Dell, Lenovo, Supermicro, PNY, Gigabyte. There's so many manufacturers out there. They are the ones who are actually creating the chips, assembling them into servers, and things of that nature. Now, it does get difficult because typically these manufacturers first sell to their preferred customers because the preferred customers are obviously purchasing at bulk. Um, but there is one limitation here, and that's the fact that every purchase does need to be approved by NVIDIA. And then there is geopolitical, I guess, reasons or concerns that, some customers won't be able to get approved by NVIDIA for, it could be just the fact that they are based in a sanctioned country or because they've done bad business, whichever. So that's the only limitation, but that's the same as any vendor refusing business. Um, in those cases, you can always go to a competitor like AMD, Intel, or now Tensor, and honestly, those chips are often just as good. The reason why NVIDIA is doing so well in this case is because of their software layer on top, which is called CUDA. This is truly the reason why uh, it feels like a monopoly. It's just the software layer. I hope that answers the question to some degree.
yeah. I guess my additional question was for the vendor like NVIDIA, do we have like an edge in negotiating them versus like big players like AWS negotiate to gain the compute power to compete in a decentralized compute system ecosystem?
I see. So if we're speaking about decentralized compute, if we're looking at the players like Aether, Akash, IONET, and all of them, um, I would for sure say that there is a competitive edge to those players, but it also depends on when we're talking about the customer who's using the compute, typically an AI company, what are their needs? Oftentimes, these customers end up on AWS or Google, GCP, because of the software infrastructure on top, and because it's easy to use, and sometimes just because it's too sticky. If we're looking at these AI companies and they're exclusively using these providers based on cost or based on what is an hourly rate of compute, then these deep in projects have way more competitive advantage. Their prices are incredible compared to the behemoths like AWS and GCP. Um, so it's really depending on like how much more stuff does that AI customer need that is not just compute? Do they
Mhm.
need the inferencing layer? Do they need the APIs, all the storage involved? That's where I would begin with asking those questions. But in general, I think they're highly competitive. I have seen so many players uh, migrating from the AWS and GCP infrastructure to DPINs. Um, I've seen a lot of it happening, and it's going to continue happening. That's partially why these big players offer such a strong credit. So like they want to keep those AI companies tied to them sticky, and that's why they offer like the 100,000, $200,000 worth of credits for compute.
That perfectly answered my question. Thank you very much, Nick. And I see in our Q&A session, there's let's take a step back. There's a fundamental question that I would like you to have you answer on this. So what does this mean to actually tokenize compute for everyday person? How can I understand this?
Yeah, I'm so glad that this person asked that question, and thank you for asking that. So, tokenizing compute is, I'm not gonna lie, it's a little bit of marketing. It means something depending on the business case. For the business case for Compute Labs, we are tokenizing compute, GPU, for the purposes of creating a structured product or an investment for the investor. So when we tokenize a compute asset, we are literally tokenizing the physical GPU and having a one-for-one back. And what that means is that now whoever owns that tokenized compute is then receiving cash flow or all the yield or all the proceeds, the profits, whichever. This is our business case. There are other business cases where we can talk about stable coins or lending and things of that nature. The business case that Compute Labs is currently focused on is creating a structured product representing ownership and equity of that GPU, which then grants you all the proceeds, the profits, and liquidation rights.
Thank you, Nick. And in addition to that, I see a question that's very related to the trading of the compute. So how do you ensure a fair marketplace where compute providers are properly incentivized and users don't face volatile pricing? And tokenized compute has faced the liquidity and demand challenges in the past. How does Compute Labs addressing these adoption barriers?
So I just like to answer this question. I first wanna clarify that our business model is not really a marketplace. So we're not dealing with any compute suppliers, but instead we are Compute Labs. We are the supplier for many marketplaces, and that's why when Nick mentioned we tokenize the hardware, which means that we're just like turning the actual asset into a structured product so that we can allow investors, mostly institutional investors, to be able to invest into the compute assets and be able to get access to the yield generated based on the cash flow on that GPU. Uh, because of that, to answer the question, I think like the marketplace will be mostly for that specific hardware that's already tokenized. And our current approach is that we are working with market makers to basically underwrite the value of the asset based on the forecasted or the contracted cash flow. And that will be I guess a price floor for the asset. And also because the tokens, they're actually backed by GPUs. So it's just gonna, I would say that from what we are observing, it's more stable than regular tokens since technically there's always a physical hardware in the world to back that token. And we do have the physical redemption in our roadmap that in the future, once the political landscape becomes more clear, the token investors, they can choose to burn the token to actually physically redeem that corresponding GPU to be taken out from the data center and delivered to their location. Yeah, I hope that
So this
answered your question.
option is open to all the token holders of the redemption option is available for all of the token holders.
Yes, because I mean, since we are a US company, And in the meantime, I think like we are pretty aligned that this tokenized GPU will for sure be classified as a security token. That's why we're following the book closely, that only institutional investors or accredited investors in the US or the countries that are not being curbed by NVIDIA and the US government will be able to redeem the physical hardware.
Got it. Thank you so much. That's super clear, Albert. And another related question is that how do the end users benefit, and what do they say as a feedback so far?
I really like that question because it's pretty straightforward for us. Our end user, there's one side, which is the data center. They get compute. They can serve their customers. It's quite easy for them to just scale their business. On the other side, our customer is also a investor who wants to receive the yield and the proceeds of their compute structure product. And for them, we're trying to, I would say our threshold is a 20% IRR. So investors are getting a healthy return on investment.
Thank you so much. Yeah, and Albert and Nicole, thank you for sharing your insights and exciting work you're doing at Compute Labs. It's very inspiring to see how you're bringing AI and blockchain to make this compute more accessible and investable. So we're very proud to have you in our portfolio and excited to see what's next. It's time that we wrap up this session, and wishing you all the continued success.
Thanks so much for having us. It's been fun.
Thanks,
Thank you so
Nikolay
much for.
and Albert.